for coming out to this event. Welcome, warm welcome to everyone. The weather is cooperating. We have this beautiful space and this wonderful setup with wonderful panelists here. I just want to welcome everyone to the iHotel event, Feminist Perspectives on a Social Movement. I'm Locke Sue. I'm the chair of the Asian American Research Center and also professor of ethnic studies and Asian American and Asian diaspora studies program here at Berkeley. I do want to let you know in advance, please go ahead and turn off your cell phones or make sure that the ringer is off or on silent mode. And I want to welcome also the people on Zoom who is piping in for this event. And to please, I want to remind you to please use the Q&A function if you want to submit your questions for later on. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Achenyo Ohlone people. The land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people, and we recognize that every member of the Berkeley community benefits and continues to benefit from, has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. Consistent with the university's values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold the university accountable to the needs of the American Native peoples. I want to also thank our many sponsors that made this event possible, starting with the center, the Asian American Research Center, the Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies Program, the Department of English, the Townsend Center for the Humanities, a Japanese American Studies Advisory Committee, the Othering and Belonging Institute, and of course the Multicultural Community Center. And a special thanks for letting us hold this event here in this beautiful space. I also want to say a special thank you to the staff that have been working so hard throughout the week. So Deborah, who is here, who is back there, thank you so much. Yay. Max, who is not here today, but he's been such an incredible source of support. He is running the Zoom from home. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you, Max, online. I want to thank Jess, also Jessica Jiang, who has assisted throughout this process. Josh Acosta as well, and really the people here, at MCC for making this happen. Thank you for your co-sponsorship. I want to also let you know that this is part of a series. So for those of you who have been following our events for the week, you will know that we had an incredible opening on Tuesday around Asian Latinx intersections. We followed up last night with a equally impressive event on Japanese American across generations. It's on embodied memories. So far, our rooms have been filled, and so it's really great for me to see this excellent turnout as well for the iHotel event. I'm gonna not say much more about the iHotel event, but really turn and let Colleen Lye, who's going to be introducing this panel, let me introduce her. Colleen Lye is Associate Professor of English at Berkeley, where she's affiliated with the Asian American Research Center, the Department of Rhetoric, and the designated emphasis in critical theory. Her first book, America's Asia, Racial Form and American Literature, 1893 to 1945, won the Cultural Studies Award from the Association of Asian American Studies. She's currently writing a book on the Asian American 60s. So welcome, Professor Lye.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm Colleen Lye, and I teach Asian American Studies in the English department here at UC Berkeley. And it's my pleasure and honor today to introduce this event featuring Colleen Yamashita, Nancy Hom, Estella Habal, and Shoshana Arai. I'll also be moderating the Q&A at the end of this session, and please note that you've been handed out these index cards on which you should hopefully, if you have a pen, write your question or questions on them in the course of the conversation that will take place, and someone will go around and collect the questions at the end and bring them up to me at the end. So, and if you don't have a card, there are extra ones on that wooden table in the middle of the room right there. So let me start by saying just a few words about the significance of this event before introducing the speakers. As you know, today's event revolves around Colleen Yamashita's novel, I, Hotel, published in 2010.
Yes, thank you.
Speak up.
No, you're just standing out.
Oh, outside of the frame. Sorry, I don't want to block our speakers. I'm confused with this. Okay. Hi. So let me start by just saying a few words. So today's event revolves around Colleen Yamashita's I, Hotel, which was published in 2010, which became an instant classic in Asian American studies and has continued to make waves. The novel, if you don't know, is a fictional retelling of a movement that took place in San Francisco from 1968 to 1977 to save a low-income residential hotel that was under threat of extinction by urban redevelopment at the time. Now, most of the residents of the International Hotel, or I Hotel as it was called, were elderly Filipino bachelors, and in smaller numbers, Chinese bachelors, who had spent their adult lives traveling up and down the West Coast to work in the farms of Oregon, Washington, and in some cases, the salmon canneries of Alaska. The I Hotel had long provided, thank you, not just affordable housing for migrant workers, but also something like a precious cultural gathering space for Asian residents who routinely faced discrimination in their jobs and when they left their ethnic enclaves. At its height, the struggle to save the hotel brought out between 5,000 and 7,000 protesters on the street, and many times more than that in volunteers over the decade-long campaign. In many ways, the anti-eviction campaign surrounding the I Hotel is the most iconic emblem of the Asian American movement of the 60s and 70s. A defense of Manilatown against the expansion of the financial district, the I Hotel anti-eviction movement still resonates today because it represents a broader, unresolved political fight. Analytically, the I Hotel anti-eviction vision of that movement saw clearly the links between racial discrimination and gentrification, and declared that housing and community represented a higher use of space than the abstraction of that space as an instrument of speculative finance. So in the sense that it is not past, the I Hotel anti-eviction movement is not, strictly speaking, history. Still, to date, not many books have been written about it. And in fact, 2 of those books are authored by people who are sitting with us here today, Colleen Yamashita and Estella Habal. Now, one we know is a fictional work, Yamashita's, and we literary scholars would call it a historical novel, or a novel that is written about an actual past historical event or period, but as a work of art, can be expected to take many liberties with its representations, right? Now, the other book is a work of history by Estella Habal, published in 2007, a little bit just before Yamashita's novel comes out, and it's called San Francisco's I Hotel. Habal's historical work is unusual in that it is written by someone who was herself an activist in the movement to save the I Hotel. Thus, it is in a different way an account of history that does not take as its premise that objectivity or psychological or social distance is always the guarantor of history's truth. It's been called by many as one of the best participant histories out there. So we could think of today's event then as an interaction between participation and representation, how these are in a way never separate activities, and especially so on this occasion, which is a conversation between a fiction writer and her historical sources. All 3 of the women Yamashita will be conversing with were activists involved in the movement to save the I Hotel, whom Yamashita interviewed in the process of doing research for her novel. And all three of them appear in the novel as fictionalized characters. This will be the first time, as I understand it, that Yamashita will be hearing at length from these interviewees as a group what they actually think of her representations of them. And so what they say today will be new to her as it will be to us. Now, this is an English professor's fantasy. Run by. What happens if characters in a novel come back to life and talk back to the author? What would they say if they were asked to review the novel in which they appear? And so this brings me to my final point. How we, the represented, always have a way of participating in our own representations. And it is this that is an important theme in Asian American studies, and in some ways is its founding remit as an academic activist project. How we, the represented, have a way of participating in our own representation is a lesson also, especially imparted by Asian American literary feminism. I'm thinking here of Maxine Hong Kingston's The Woman Warrior, a text that is an important reference point in Yamashita's novel, where stories are handed down between generations of women who each add to them the art of their own version. Though the residents of the I Hotel were male, as was the most visible leadership of the political groups that rallied to its cause, women activists played a really important role. Something that reading Yamashita's I Hotel will never let us forget. So here with us to talk with us today are three of those women activists: Estella, whom I've already mentioned, Nancy Hom, and Shoshana Arai. So without further ado, I'd just like to give a very brief sketch of our speaker biographies. Shoshana Arai's parents relocated from the WRA concentration camps to the south side of Chicago. There, she attended Chicago's only integrated high school, and as a freshman became involved in SNCC. She organized rent strikes in CORE's summer housing campaign and was involved in STS's Union for Jobs for Income Now. In 1969, Arai moved to the Bay Area, catching the tail end of UC Berkeley's Third World Liberation Strike, and then relocated to San Francisco's J-Town, where she got involved in various Serve the People projects. Over the years, she's worked as a critical care nurse and has taught as a professor of health sciences at UCSF. Nancy Hom is an award-winning silkscreen artist, writer, graphic designer, curator, and children's book illustrator. She was born in Toisan, China, and came to the US when she was 5. She grew up in New York City and graduated from Pratt in 1971. She landed in San Francisco in 1974 and drove straight to the I Hotel and became involved with the Kearney Street Workshop, which is an artist collective that shared space with a dry goods store on the ground floor of the I Hotel. Today, the KSW exists as the oldest Asian American multidisciplinary arts nonprofit, and from 1995 to 2003, Nancy was its executive director. Estella Habal is a professor emerita at San Jose State University, where until her retirement in 2014, she taught courses in Asian American history and women's studies. She was a member of the KDP, a Filipino revolutionary organization which fought against the Philippine President Marcos' dictatorship and for democratic rights in the US in the 1970s and 1980s. In the 1990s, she helped to resurrect low-income housing at the new International Hotel, and in 2005, helped to open up the International Hotel Manilatown Center. Last but not least, Tei Yamashita is a highly awarded author of 8 books. She is also a playwright and screenwriter. She was born in Oakland to survivors of incarceration at the Topaz internment camp during World War II. She has lived in Los Angeles, Tokyo, Brazil, and Santa Cruz. And for many years until her retirement, she taught creative writing and Asian American literature at UCSC, where she was also a co-holder with Bettina Aptheker of the UC Presidential Chair in Feminist, Critical Race, and Ethnic Studies. I'll now be handing over the mic to Karen, who will moderate her own conversation. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished guests.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you so much. And also thank you to all of the organizers, in particular Jessica and Maxwell and Locke. You're just amazing. This has been an amazing week. Thank you so much. And a special thanks to Shoshana, to Estella, and to Nancy. Thank you so much for being here. I had to, yeah, pull all your legs to to convince you that this is the thing we have to do. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go up here and do this thing. So what I thought I'd do today was to read some fiction. And wait, so I just, oh, excuse me, because I don't, okay, here is the first one. Yeah. So I start by reading some fiction, and here we go. So this, and let's say I'm serenading. First, I'm serenading Shoshana. And here's my serenade, Shoshana. One day, Mrs. Lee said to Rhea, "What'd your mama say about your work?" "Oh, I don't know." "I know you can sew, but this factory can't last." Rhea tried to protest. "No, don't try to fool me. I know, everybody knows." Mrs. Lee tapped Rhea on the knee. "Some are saying you are killing yourself, so we have to kill ourselves too. This is the beginning of the bad end." Rhea's face fell. "But," Mrs. Lee smiled encouragingly, "I think different. You are too smart to be here. We don't need more dresses. We need more brains." She pointed to Rhea's head. "Go back to school. Better to finish." "I am finished." "No, you are not finished." "I'm not?" "I'm finished. Next week, I go get U.S. citizenship, thanks to you." "Oh, that's wonderful." "Look," Mrs. Lee pointed to a Vogue magazine photo of a thin blonde model wearing a silk chartreuse Mao jacket. "See," she pointed. "Hey, you can't win," said Mrs. Lee. "No? No. Somebody steal your idea, steal your culture every time." She paused and laughed. "Okay, Mao's not my culture, but I am Chinese." Rhea shook her head. "But don't worry, more ideas where that came from." Mrs. Lee nudged her. "Listen, I tell you something. American Revolution is happening 200 years. What's 200 years? Mrs. Lee spit air into the air. "But," she gestured, "first time is the last time. Can't make same revolution twice. Look at me." Mrs. Lee looked into Rhea's eyes. "I know what you think, but I am not the revolution." Rhea laughed. "Yes, you are." Mrs. Lee shook her head. "I know students think East is red, but this is not the East. So you better go. Go figure out a new way." "New way?" "Yes. We say the sun rises in the East, but now we live in the West. Now I am American. I am not leaving. You go make a sunrise in the West." Rhea looked confused. "Okay, manner of speaking." Mrs. Lee waved her hand. "You study, you find out." "If I go, then what?" "We got a plan. We're going into child care service. Chinatown child care." Mrs. Lee made like it was a banner across the I Hotel. "Quit sewing." "I never liked it anyway." So that's fiction number one. So this is for Estella. Okay. It's Wednesday night, August 3, 1977. Abra and I are looking out on my window. "How many down there, you figure?" Back in January for that protest, the newspaper said 5,000. How can so many people fail? Now I hear the sirens have stopped right in front of the I Hotel, right in front of my room. I say to Abra, "They're gonna shoot us with water." Next moment, I see the fire ladder extend, lands on the second floor corridor window. That's their plan, tough fist guys, Samoans included, resisting at the front door look up. They're bypassed by a ladder. Firemen and police scale it like it's a siege. coming up to our floor in heavy boots, protective gear, goggles with clubs and axes, looking like monsters. We hear the commotion outside, smashing glass, hatchets going through the doors, breaking locks. All right, everybody out. Get up, get going, time's up. Bobby's dragged away, bounced downstairs. Abra sitting on my bed, and for the first time, I see her crying. I'm sorry, Felix. I failed you. What you talking? I touch her hands folded tight in her lap. You cannot fail. You can only live your life. You're going to see when you're my age. They're knocking at my door. They're at my door, knocking even. I say like I'm stupid. Who is it? Sheriff's Department, it's time to leave. Leave? Yes, that's right. Open up right now. Abra wipes her eyes and pulls open the door. Her body is back to being fierce. She says, you keep your hands off this gentleman. We will leave quietly, but keep your hands off. She pulls me from the bed, holds on to my arm. We walk out together. Fiction number 2. And this is for Nancy. Up on the roof. Oh, and this is a story that Al Robles told me. Anyway, but here I'll just read it. Up on the roof, share the Christian brothers with the poetry sisters, who oblige you with a small sample of their work. Listen to Cleo's lyrics for a song about a hound dog daddy who abuses and rapes her, about that daddy getting what's coming to him. If Cleo could hook up her guitar and mic, she'd blast the message into every tongue association in Chinatown, every strip bar on the North Beach, every men's room, in every office body in the building in the financial district. Huddle under that rising moon, quiet and contemplative, after Cleo's emotional rendition. But the poetry brothers are already pretty drunk, and therefore giddy, stupid, and insensitive. Well, I'd say it's a rock song, and it works for shock value, but I don't do rock. I'm more a jazz man myself. Hey, it's not really a poem, it's a song. Let's be honest. Do all women have this imagination of their fathers doing it to them? What do you call it? Electra complex? That Freudian shit is for white people. Shit, what's this saying about Asian men? That's what I want to know. Why do you want to make us out to be assholes? When are you going to give us a break? When we write poetry, we write about how we love you. Finally, we stand up to the white man and you blame us for your bound feet. This is the girls, or the women. You fucking pigs, Cleo yells and runs from the rooftop. Poetry sisters all close behind. Hey, where are they going? Just having a constructive conversation. Thought she wanted my opinion. Actually, I liked it. Lean over the edge of the roof of the I Hotel and see the dark figures of the poetry sisters charging down Kearney, a twinkle of poetry dust sparkling in their wake. Shout drunkenly, Asian sisters, come back! We love you! Fiction number 3. Third world revolutionary women rose to the occasion with such speech making. Black people and Vietnamese people have exposed the weakness of white Western dominance, revealing that the weak and oppressed can struggle against a powerful enemy. Our feminist liberation movement must be viewed within this context of an international social revolution and the struggle by women for our human rights. And further, in the fight for national liberation in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, women have not waited first to, quote, give their men their manhood, unquote. And second, to wage the war, they have first and foremost taken arms and gone to war. Fiction number 4. I guess my first question for all of you is, do you know each other, and why or why not? Maybe My friends at UC Santa Cruz are into doing game theory, and they turn the boxes. For those of you who know but these are the boxes that are the structure for the iHotel. And I just wanted you to know who I've given them to. So these boxes are for Shoshana.
Oh,
Yeah. And
they're actual cute.
yeah, and these are for all right. And then you can see which boxes I handed out. So they're provocations for all of our conversation. And what else did I do here? Okay. So I guess I read those sections of fiction for you.
Where they go?
Oh man, don't lose that, man.
I know. Found it.
So yeah, I guess the question is, okay, I read the fiction. Okay, just tell me. Say whatever you want. I'll leave the room. I know. Go ahead.
Was your fiction?
You don't even know which.
Which one? Okay.
Okay, mine was fiction too.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it was pretty accurate, actually, except for the fact that they weren't wearing goggles.
Oh, they weren't.
No,
You mean
the sheriff and the police.
no, the sheriff. But
Which one?
weren't the firemen who came.
Yeah.
The firemen. who
Yeah,
came
that's yeah.
up?
Okay.
I thought
Okay.
I saw them.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a picture in there.
There
Okay.
might be. I remember the goggles.
With the goggles. Okay.
Mm.
So I was inside, and so she described that part. And it was a terrifying experience. What was not there, okay, you're asking me about accuracy and
No, I just asked.
okay. Okay, so the terrifying part for the people that were outside were the horses. So that's kind of like the backdrop, because before they got inside and that terrifying stuff with the ladders going up into the room, breaking the glass, the windows, getting inside, and then going in the hallway and then knocking on the doors and saying, "Come out now, you're being evicted," And so we had decided this was going to peaceful, nonviolent protest. And so once he said that, we walked out. Okay. And for some who were on the banister, they were being pulled out, and that was kind of violent. But the people in front with the horses, that was really terrifying, even more, I think. That, and so each one of those people inside was paired up with a tenant. And so your description of one being escorted by a young person was, what happened. And, but we all felt like, why is this happening now? We did security, for a long time to prevent the eviction and to tell people, on a phone tree that they should come. But when it actually happened, we were all kind of in disbelief, even though we knew we were preparing for it for so long. So it's it was very terrifying. So and I think you captured that.
Thank you.
So not fiction. It was real. Yeah. Very real. Nancy, what about you?
What was the question?
Oh, I would have just wanted you to reflect on the fiction I wrote.
I didn't recognize myself in it. I guess I wasn't on the roof, but I remember Al Robles very fondly because Al was such an influence at the I Hotel and beyond the I Hotel. I mean, if there was anybody who united everybody, students who came in, people like me, fresh out of school, all the seniors in the building and around the neighborhood, it was Al. And he did it through poetry. He did it by feeding us. And he did it through storytelling. So my relationship with Al was more of at Kearney Street Workshop, we had events every night, if you can imagine that we would have a day job and then quickly eat dinner and rush to the hotel for whatever it was that night, whether it's poetry class or silkscreen class, drawing class, or whatever it was. And I attended Al's poetry class. And it wasn't like what you described. Al would he always respected everybody, and he especially encouraged the women. So Al would always nudge me and say, Nancy, you got a poem? And I didn't have a poem. And then the next week, he would go, Nancy, you have a poem. I wouldn't have a poem. And he did this for 2 years. And then one day he said, Nancy, you got a poem? Yeah, Al, I got a poem. And then another one, and another one. And I think he just kind of opened the floodgates to whatever was in my head. Al was a seer. He could see you. He really saw you. And tried to get me to sing, but that never happened. That was Al's spirit. And of all of us, we had a different relationship with the tenants in the building. But Al would go to every single tenant to make sure they were okay every single day. And he did that before eviction, during eviction, and after eviction. And then sat on the boards and sat on all those committees, sat on all those stays of eviction. He sat on everything to make sure that people did not forget the I Hotel. So that's my plug for Al Robles in this feminist setting.
Actually, when I was listening to Karen Reed, there's actually truth in everything she says, different bits and pieces of everyone's story. And I think she really blended it well together, because I think that that's actually what it was. I mean, there were so many people at International Hotel, and it was such a long, long struggle. I mean, people think about in terms of, well, we did so many demonstrations, but it's 10 years, and then it was 30 years of hole in the ground. So I actually consider the building of the low-income housing on that site is probably the most tangible victory of the Asian movement. It was a really long, long effort to do that. And in the process, the story, I was just thinking, when I was looking at Karen's book, this took place before most of you were born, so it's really ancient history. But, when you look at that, like on mine, they have RG. Do you know what that stands for? RG. RG. That's the red cards, Red cards was a really important development in Chinatown. She has bits and pieces where she has collected what happened and what didn't happen and put it together. And I think that's actually what storytelling really is. And that's how we actually come to understand things. It's like, actually, I didn't have a conversation with Mrs. Lee because Mrs. Lee didn't really exist. But I'm sure that people thought that they had that conversation. And when she talked about the Mao jacket, that seems like kind of, why would you try to make Mao jackets? Well, my friend Geraldine jumped out of bed at midnight and started using newspapers to, make a design of a Mao jacket. And why on earth we think that we're going to survive by sewing Mao jackets? Well, we thought that was a good idea. And so people made Mao jackets. And then from there, they said, oh, God, that's not the only thing people are doing. There's actually garment factories, there's sweatshops. Then people spent the next 10, 15 years organizing in the sweatshops. So is that reality or is that fiction? I mean, I have pictures I brought you of Geraldine, and we know her as Dragon Lady, and B. You saw a photograph of B. Tan while she married Harvey, so B. Dong, sewing in the garment factory. So is that real or not real? I mean, you have to kind of think about that. And I think that's basically what we're learning nowadays, is that the storytelling is not a matter, was this said verbatim, exactly accurate? Did this series of events happen one carefully after another? History is not so carefully linear. At least that's what I've learned. It's, in some ways, it's not really a hodgepodge, but to me, it's more like a kaleidoscope. And I think Karen captures that a lot. The stories merge, it's like what you kind of remembered, and then you talk to someone else who's also there with you, and they have a completely different impression of what actually was taking place. It's just like the Tule Lake, Alcatraz. Actually, the thing about Bruce Lee dies. Big Bruce Lee. You guys ever seen Bruce Lee movies? He was a big thing. It was very common. You're walking down the street, and kids, I don't care what neighborhood you're in, would stop and say, "Okay, that's okay. Don't hit me. I know about Bruce." And when they said, "I know about Bruce," they weren't talking about their dog. They were talking about Bruce Lee. So this happened. I would be walking down the streets in Chicago. I could be walking down the streets in San Francisco, and they would say that. So is that fiction or is that reality? So it's hard to say, and I think that's what's really fun. And I don't know if this actually, does that actually tell the story? Is that what actually helps you understand what took place at the High Hotel? I brought photographs. My older sister Nikki, is a photographer, and I put together like an album of her photographs of that time period. And then I just dawned on me, oh my God, actually, you're not, it's gonna be hard for you to see that. So I actually have some slides you want to see, and you could actually see why sometimes the story really changes. And what Karen is writing about is what took place and what we also hoped would take place. A lot of the conversations that we really wanted to hear, a lot of the stupid things that we did, that we actually hope that people would forget. And then the things like when she says to Raya to go back to school, then I thought about myself, I actually did go back to school, so is that real or not real? Estella went back to school, Nancy went on, all of the women went on back to school, back to doing, and so I don't know, maybe actually Karen caught those little conversations that we actually didn't quite understand, and we kind of said, oh God, I don't know what they're talking about. And she actually created that's part of the story. Colleen, you wanna? Any more? Okay. I just want to talk about the women that were involved in the High Hotel. And so that little story that you talked about, that I said is partly true. It's actually represents, even though that particular instance is not exactly true, it actually does represent the activism of women in the High Hotel, which is that they did everything on every stage, And so in the beginning, it was a community struggle in the Filipino community, okay? And that was in 66, 67. And the people that helped these Filipino men were social workers, and they were women, okay? One of the women, when there was a protest about how the bad conditions in that hotel, actually moved in to be a tenant so that she could talk about what was inside the bad conditions that happened, okay? And then the third world strike happened at San Francisco State and Berkeley and other smaller colleges around. And so all of these students, third world students, came down to do community work, okay? And so many of them, at least half, I would say, were women. Mm-hmm. So they were part of this at every stage. And so the organizing that happened, from Kearney Street Workshop with Nancy, and, you're working in the factory, those were women, okay? And then, for myself, I was part of the tenant organizer inside the I Hotel. And so, we organized the security, we did press conferences, we did, But what you see out there, though, visually, is mainly men. And I think that's also part of times, even though we were doing the work, we didn't see ourselves as feminists. Okay, so, it's part of the same activism that the men did, but we didn't see ourselves as feminists because it wasn't, we didn't think of it that way. We just thought of it as a community struggle, third world movement, serving the people, in general. And so the women were just part of the struggle. They were just integral part of it. We didn't see ourselves as separate or anything like that. So, and even till today, I'm still part of the Manilatown Center. And if you all haven't gone to see the new International Hotel, Nancy was even part of that, like building that up. And so we were doing that for, 30 years. Years. While I was going to school, I was still doing that. And finally I started to teach. And so I did less of it, but I'm still connected even till today. So it's a lifelong kind of activism struggle. And the women were the integral part of that every step of the way.
I also want to talk about the woman, but I also want to expand the notion of activism, because we tend to think of the I Hotel struggle as, protesting and the person giving speeches, and it's usually the men, and more often it's usually the male tenants. And that's natural because there were mostly elderly men in the building. So I remember Wahat Tampal, Felix Eisen, these are the leaders of the struggle, and rightly so, because they lived there and it's their community. And even though we came in, I fresh from New York, and some people from Berkeley, some people from SF State, I had the feeling that we didn't want to suddenly be the face of the struggle, because it's not our building ultimately. We were passionate about it, and Kearney Street Workshop was a tenant in the building, but it wasn't quite our struggle. We wanted to boost them up. And wonderful speakers, by the way. Felix Eisen was deaf, but he spoke so eloquently about why we should have a home, why they were entitled to have a home. So behind the scenes, there are many women who did their activist work, but you wouldn't define it as such. I remember Juliana Sorrow, the wife of Bill Sorrow. She was a fabulous cook, big Italian dinners, and she lived there in the hotel, cooked these huge batches of food, opened the door, and there'd be a line out the door for her food. But in doing that, she was building community, because it could be just a regular SRO if you didn't have community, and you always had to build community. There are many SROs in San Francisco where everybody lived alone, not talking to anybody, but maybe their neighbor or an occasional friend. But this was a real community, and that's the way the women helped build it. There was Mrs. D, Mrs. Delacruz, who found some little stairway with some shaft of light, and she would put plants out there. I bought the calendar that Kearney Street Workshop did right after eviction. There's a beautiful picture of her watering the plants outside, and I don't even know how to describe it. It was a balcony or whatever it was. Lots of plants, because she brought beauty into the hotel. And there were many other instances like that, so that you really felt like you were home. And that's what fueled the struggle, because we were fighting for our home. We were not fighting out of an ideological thing of SROs must be saved, or, the fight for the Filipino community. It was more, this is really our home, and don't take our home away from us.
I guess I have to use that. So I asked a question of, did you know each other? Because you are on different parts of the struggle. I would say that Nancy with the artists, and then Estella with the KDP, with the actual collective. And then I don't know how Shoshana would characterize, your activism. Yeah. But you're a representative of different kinds of communities of activism. And I don't know if you knew, did you know Shoshana?
Probably. I don't think so.
Sister.
Yeah, my sister. Yeah.
Right. So, there's some, and when I was interviewing or meeting people, I was surprised that people didn't know each other, or that there was hostility between groups, and that you might know of each other, but you wouldn't necessarily have had a connection during the day. Can you talk about a little about all the differences and the collaborations, or how you finally did come together, and then how you think about it now?
Well, that's the beauty of being part of a cultural institution. And we knew there was fighting between different ideological camps. So everybody had a certain idea of how to save the I Hotel, and which was very similar, but different methods, or whatever the differences were, it separated the groups. And then there were accusations of, we are more political than you. This is the correct way, and everybody was very staunch in their righteousness. But we were an art school.
You were an artist.
And we somehow got along with everybody because everybody loved art. We served the community by doing silkscreen posters. Everybody, whether this ideology or that ideology, they all needed our services. So we did flyers, and we didn't have that division. And of course, we had our Robles, our poet, who brought everybody together. He was, if you knew Al Robles, he skated above all this. You couldn't even understand him sometimes. He talked like, and then you go, oh, okay, I guess I know. I don't know what. But somehow in your heart, you knew what he was talking about, and everybody would come. And he would, it wasn't about any ism. He would say, well, come, we're going to have a lot of food. And then everybody would come, and that's how you would unite the community. And then you show a few slides and do a few things. So anyway, I just feel very lucky we were able to do several exhibitions while in the hotel about the struggle of the hotel. And then all these groups would come by, and nobody could argue with what was on the wall. So in that sense, as part of an arts group, it was a very unifying thing for me.
I really think so. I think, but that's actually the role that art has played in many groups. That period of time, there were, I think it's actually maybe a necessary part in political movements. There's a need to define yourself and defend your territory. There were a lot of leftist groups, all one better than the other, and to this dying day, they will hold on to that. And I could kind of understand that because my first group that I became involved with was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that really didn't exist out here on the West Coast. And I've been since then through a lot of different organizations. And that's probably the only one that I hold allegiance to. But I think that Kearney Street, workshop was like a tie. It was like the one voice that we could all kind of support. I think that, can I show you some of the pictures? Because I think that when we think of the hotel, I don't want you to think of the I Hotel, and this is what Karen is able to do in her book. It wasn't just the building on Kearney Street. The I Hotel was in many ways the kind of the nucleus that spread into other communities. And it's not just the neighborhood communities down the block or in J-Town or Manilatown, but it spread around the world. And that's what I want you to see.
That's my sister, Nikki. One thing that if you look at her facial structure, it's very much like Karen's. One reason why she's always like looking at Karen. She's the same narrow face.
Nah, she's more beautiful.
Okay, obviously, the hotel, we see all these pictures.
You see all these pictures of the front of the building. There were a lot of storefronts on the first level of Curry Street. That's where, you know, the Curry Street Workshop, ACC, Everybody's Bookstore. Obviously, the tenants. My sister focused a lot on the tenants in the building, and kind of little things. When you live in an SRO, you live in a room, and the light is very, very important. So that's very important that you have light. That's your source of connection with the world. Okay, again, we're like, see that, remember what Estella was talking about, the growing? That is very important. It's very important. This is actually one of my favorite pictures, and it really, to me, captures what it's like living in an SRO. My mother married many times, but my father actually lived in an SRO, very similar to this. And that's what life is also like. It's actually a very lonely life. So when the students flooded in and it became a community cause, made a big difference. These are some of the people that were there. Brian, he wasn't always doing Gung Fu, but right next to him is Lonnie Ding. Lonnie, you know, there was the U.S. food surplus program. So they would give big 5-pound boxes of dried milk, 5-pound chunks of cheese, and nobody in Chinatown eats 5 pounds of cheese and dried milk. So Lonnie had to figure out a way to get people to use that stuff, because we got it and you have to put it out there. So other guys, draft resisting, counseling, because, you know, they were still recruiting people for the Vietnam War. That's Juan Gonzalez. I don't know if you guys have ever watched on TV Democracy Now!, you know, Amy Goodman. Well, he was actually one of the co-anchors. I think he's kind of retired, but that's Juan Gonzalez when he was looking young and very good. And he was very active in the Puerto Rican Liberation Front. Lots of guys there all the time, looking good, bad, you know, all the time. We also had the women too. And the reason why I picked these women in particular, I put Chris up there. That's Chris. It was you notice the false eyelashes and the little mark above that. Well, that was all part of how we got ourselves together. But when you had kids, it was very hard to participate in an organization. The one up there that's smiling, that's Colette Akimi. She wasn't at the hotel, but her sister down there, that's Colleen Lye, and she actually moved into the hotel, and she died at the hotel. So, you know, Colette Akimi, she's still singing. You could actually go onto the internet and hear her singing her songs. She was really wonderful. And this is actually, you know, this is down in ACC. They were doing Tai Chi. This was actually, that's a student, and that's B10. Or Bidong, we're exercising. This is the dragon lady that I was talking about. This is my friend Geraldine, and you know, she's actually posed. You see the background print, but that's actually the 20th century version of the dragon lady. And Geraldine is the one that leaped up out of bed at midnight to cut out of newspapers the pattern for the Mao jackets. That's B10 or Bidong sewing. Yeah. So when they went into the garment factories to work in the garment factories, it wasn't just like a lark. You know, you could just drop in and say hello to everybody. There's a lot of work. We had a lot of demonstrations. This was against Key. And actually, nobody even remembers who Key was. He was the prime minister of South Vietnam. And he wrote in an interview that the guy he admired the most was Hitler. So there's a lot of demonstrations about that. That's why there's that sign, "Long live Hitler and Nixon." But you know, it wasn't just the guys at the demonstration. That's Paulette. There's the guys too. The women were there too. And here, people kind of think that, you know, you just went out on a demonstration and had a good time. That's what there were a lot of injuries at the key demonstration. There were a lot of people. Actually, some of the police were beaten up at the key demonstration. This is at the Carolyn Wong and Yuri Miyagawa. Yuri is right there, right behind Greg. And she was there. This is International Women's Day. And this is Dolores Park in San Francisco. And you know what? At International Women's Day, they had a lot of speakers, but they didn't ask anyone who wasn't white. So Yuri and Carolyn spoke. This is other demonstrations. The one on the bottom, that's Warren Puritani. He just came out with a book. That was for Los Sete. There was a rally down in San Francisco. I don't think people even know about the case of Los Sete. It's 7 Latinx guys who were arrested for charges of killing a policeman. Their lawyer was Charles Gary. It was one of the few cases in social justice movements where we won. They got off. Right next to that, with her fist raised, that is actually considered the icon of Asian resistance. That's B. Tam again, raising her hand. That's at Jonathan Jackson's funeral in Oakland. He was a 17-year-old who was killed. Black Panther. This is my sister. This was the press corps that was showing up when Huey P. Newton was released. I don't know if you guys know about Huey. I think you've probably heard his name as Black Panther. But, you know, he was sent to prison, and when he got released, that was a really big step. And the reason why I included this picture is that this is when Huey got out. And Huey was one of the most photogenic guys around. But J. Edgar Hoover, during the COINTEL program, had a whole program on the messianic person that occurred. That he felt that in the Black movement, when a Black Messiah appeared, that the masses would rise up and fight against the white structure. So they were very adamant about controlling that. So obviously, Huey was one of the ones they targeted, so they did their best to put him out of commission. The other one that they targeted was Fred Hampton. And in Chicago, they did their best and they killed him. So that's why this photograph I put included. So I want to say that for the I Hotel, the ripples from the I Hotel extended all the way around. It wasn't just on Kearny Street, but the ripples of what took place really took place there. It took place all over. So you really think that Karen wrote fiction? I don't think so. Beautiful photos. Thank you for sharing them. Yeah, let's hear from Estella. Yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wanted to speak to the question that Karen asked about how did these groups come together? What was it that got them to, even though they had these ideological differences? And so one of it was in the beginning, it was a pan-Asian movement. We felt that we had a shared history. For example, the tenants in the I Hotel were Filipino and Chinese. Okay. And the work history of those tenants was the same, which is that they were migrant workers. They worked in the fields, and some of them even became labor union leaders. And so that shared history became kind of the glue of the Asian Americans working in the I Hotel in this community struggle. So that was the early, I guess, since the rise of the Third World Movement and the Asian American movement, that was the early period. But a little bit later on, maybe 71, 72, around that time, the groups started to form their own ethnic-based organizations. Okay, and so it was Japanese, it was Chinese, and Filipino. Okay, and those were the Asian groups at the time. There were others, but those are the main Asian groups. So in the Filipino movement, there was the KDP, and that coalesced mainly around racial discrimination against Filipinos and martial law in the Philippines. And so that group came together, but it was also related to Mao Zedong, because the ideas that came out of the Philippines, of the Philippine Revolution, were Maoist, okay? And so that influence was brought to the United States through, at first, the underground Filipino organization called the Kalayaan. And then that formed in 1973, became the KDP. Okay, so that got sustained though within the I Hotel. Okay, but the transformations also began there. With the other groups, the IWK and Women's Shea, they were Chinese groups, but they also had differences with each other. But they were also Maoists and also communists. Okay, so these groups, had some unity because of that background, but because of how they viewed racial and national discrimination in the United States and how that relates to a national liberation struggle, that was a question. How do you do that? How do you fight against discrimination on the ground in the United States and at the same time support liberation, national liberation in the Philippines? So those questions got very heated, So the KDP was the most pragmatic. In fact, the other two groups called us the South Maoists.
That's an insult.
Which is an insult, because we want to be Maoists. So, so we pretty much followed what struggle was about and knew that core had to be the tenants. And we helped to form the International Hotel Tenants Association, which the other groups didn't do that. Okay. So there was always the charge from, I guess, news people and outsiders that these students had taken over the struggle and that they were the main force out there. And so, we would always criticize that, but then they changed too. So they would put out they called them advanced workers. And parade them around, that, oh, we got this tenant for us now, tenants for us, So there's all this competition between the different groups. Okay, so that's the competition that was going on in the struggle. However, at the end, when we were fighting against eviction, we were all together. Okay, why? Because we didn't want the eviction. We fought for, it was a 10-year battle. How many struggles do you know that is 10 years? That's anti-eviction, right? I mean, it doesn't happen that way, but it happened in this Asian American movement. It happened here at Hotel. And so it doesn't get play that much, I think. And I'm not sure why, but I have my suspicions because people don't want to touch it because it had all these Maoist. Right? So
Maybe you could also, well, I'd like to hear a little bit about the mothers. I mean, what was that like? And yeah, just get that out.
okay. Sorry.
Especially for Estella.
Okay. I'm kind of I would say an outlier because I was not a student that came into the IHotel struggle. I was already a mother. I had 2 children, and but I was in the KDP. So how could I be involved? How was that possible? Well, it's because in the KDP, we had a child care system that helped to take care of my kids. You know, later on, maybe a few years later, there were other kids that were born, and we had a thing called Por los Niños. Por los Niños was an elaborate child care system for when the women were in meetings. You know, so it was kind of sophisticated, but on the other hand, you know, being a mother, you have motherly duties too. So that wasn't really understood that well, and that was kind of painful. But the fact that I was able to be active at the same time was a blessing for me, and it changed my life. I was able to be active. So
Actually, I didn't know that. And I really want to honor Estella about the KDP, that it was such a crucial thing. When you talk about, let's say, students coming to organize in a community, and then you talk about a 10-year struggle, you're no longer, a student from some campus showing up in between classes. But the fact that they provided childcare, that meant that she could participate, that she could be part of it. And that's actually really key in any movement. But it doesn't always work out that way. It was interesting in J-Town. When I had kids, basically I was told to go find a babysitter. But one thing that happened because of that, there's a lot of nationals that come to work, and they could only get jobs as waitresses, and so they would come and just say, I got a job as a waitress, except that I don't make enough money to pay for childcare, but I can't leave my kids home alone. So what am I going to do? I was like, oh God, here we go. Okay, we got to figure out something. And sure enough, I don't know, one of the guys marching, his sister, Sandy Takai, said, I'm a teacher, and I think we should just organize something for these moms, like childcare. That's what started Neomachi Little Friends. It's still going on today. So I think that one of the things that happened on Kearney Street is they raised the questions that people have to deal with every day in their life. And that's what you see kind of flowered out of that. You see the end product, and it takes place in different communities in different ways. It's just like, I remember one of the moms came to me, and we were just dealing with whatever community issue came up in J-Town. And she says, I don't like the way my kids being educated in San Francisco public schools. I said, okay. What do you want? She says, I want a bilingual, bicultural education. Oh, good luck. She says, okay, well, I think it's important. These kids need something right now when they're young. That's the most important time. I said, okay, what do you want? I wanted in the San Francisco public school system a bilingual bicultural program. And I said, oh God, here we go. Okay. Backed her up. And everyone, Kenji Murase out of San Francisco State wrote up their proposal. I paid for the babysitters to babysit their kids when they went to all the meetings at the school board. And they have actually now, and it's still going on, the bilingual bicultural program, a Japanese program in San Francisco. So that's what comes out of Kearney Street. And it comes out in different forms. And that's what you don't see when you first go down there and you're just coming down because you got a break in school and can spend a little time down there. You don't see that. And I didn't see that. It's just like, the Black Panthers program had a breakfast for children. Well, it was really difficult, First of all, people have to get up early in the morning to cook. That nearly killed half the chapter, just what's those cooking. But did you know that the J. Edgar Hoover's, the FBI targeted the Breakfast for Children's programs? They went after, they would call up the public health department to close down. And any, let's say like Jack in the Box that donated some food would have special visits paid to them. So you think, okay, so, in the end, the Black Panthers basically were eliminated. And you think, well, that's all. Except that the Breakfast for Children's program is pretty widely accepted that most school districts now do a Breakfast for Children's program. So was that a failure or not? But actually, that's one of the outcomes. And we didn't see that when we were in the midst of doing all that. We didn't see what could be possible. We had to just try it. And I think, Estelle saying about childcare, that's a really basic need. And the fact that, that was something that was raised was really, really important.
I think Colleen is looking at me like,
Okay,
We got some questions. So that's actually a great segue to some of the questions in terms of the legacy of all what you did. So actually, I just wanted to mention that we have 66 people on Zoom watching this, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in the chat. Those of you who are actually here, I want to remind you, if you have a question or a comment, write it down on the card, and someone can run and pick it up, and so I can, also time things to make sure to get your questions in. So the first thing I wanted to say was, there's a comment here from a Kathy Toshiro. Shoshana, she says, those pictures brought back a lot of memories. So a note of appreciation there. Okay, so now we have a long question. I'll just see how long it is, but it's a good question. I'm going to read it out. It's a question from Mia Summers. She says, I Hotel is one of my favorite books in that I was able to see myself and the contemporary struggles and contradictions I'm addressing in my organizing work. In thinking about the legacy of the International Hotel and the book I Hotel to build a radical consciousness, where do you all see yourselves today as part of the continuation of the movement, building reciprocal, intergenerational, queer, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, feminist relationships? How to continue to bring people along with you and resist being reactionary? This is a question for all of you, for any of you.
Well, do we have to resist being reactionary? Oh, God, you guys.
Anyone want to take that one?
It's hard for me to put labels on myself. So I forgot that whole list of what is it? Activist.
Reciprocal, intergenerational, queer, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, feminist relationships. But I think it doesn't have to be all of those. Just maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't speak to academies, and I tell everybody that. and I don't do a lot with isms and ists and things. But I consider the work I do presently and throughout my whole 55-year career as part of the continuum of my activism. But from the I Hotel, I went on to create multicultural children's books, and then I went on to found some organizations that are still around today. And then I nurtured Kearney Street Workshop until one day I became director for almost 9 years. And after I left that, I helped several other organizations, arts organizations, with anything from strategic planning to organizational development. And some of them you would recognize, they're still around and thriving today. That's activism. And also I left, I didn't leave the I Hotel like Estella Habal. It was a lifelong struggle. So the 25 years or however many, nobody could build anything on that hotel, on that hole in the ground for all that time, because we wouldn't let it. We wouldn't let it go, and we didn't let anybody, especially a corporation, take it over. And in the end, the corporation, I forgot its name, some Thai company, gave it up, gave it back to the city. And through a lot of different collaborations and partnerships, we got our iHotel Center, Manilatown Center back. When it first opened, I went back there as a program director and programmed something every week to make sure that there was still community there, and made it continue, and then saw different directors and helped the directors, and et cetera, et cetera. And at one point I went back to my own art. And my own art now is creating these huge three-dimensional mandalas. It's hard to describe them, but they're sculptural pieces on the floor that bring together all of the communities, including that long list you mentioned, so that everybody could see each other and unite with each other and exchange ideas and stuff. So in some ways, that's the only way I know how to be an activist, is by uniting people, uniting communities, making people talk and exchange ideas. And like Karen, in a lot of ways, is all different pieces, but it's all cohesive in one book or in a mandala, or I don't know how many I've done, dozens of mandalas, and each time it brings together different communities.
Wow, I think that's a great answer, and I feel like your sort of visual response with the art image actually speaks to the list, right? Because the list is about the multidimensionality of the iHotel movement, and that's why people today, I think, can see so many different aspects of struggle in that movement, even though they might seem separate, they're actually connected. So I think that's super cool. I wonder whether Estella or Shoshana, you wanted to say anything about how you relate to later activisms, or how you see yourself maybe in relation to what feels like a contemporary resurgence of activism in the last 10 years.
Okay.
It's
Well,
not on.
Oh, not on. How do you turn it on? Oh, here?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay. Well, it was a long and difficult struggle because I had children. I went back to raising the children. However, that was, I would say, maybe 10 years or so. And then I went back to school. And then I decided I was going to write about the hotel. And that was also difficult because I'm in the history department. and the history discipline frowns upon people
For actually being part of it.
yeah, for being part of it. They don't like that. They want third person. They want whatever. And so I tried to, straddle the different things. And so when they got to the part where it was, I have some of it there about me and what I did and what happened during the eviction and all of that. So I felt like I had to put that in. They wanted to take it out, and I said, take it or leave it. I didn't care. And so they accepted it, so that was a struggle. And so while I was going to school, we were building the new iHotel. So I was still active there, and that was from 1995 to 2005, so a 10-year battle again. And we met with HUD, we met with Mayor Brown, we met with all the different officials. We met with the architects, how to build the building, how to make it Asian, all of that kind of stuff. Slew meetings, so that was hard, but there's now a beautiful iHotel, and there's low-income housing. And then after that, there was the Manilatown Center, and so I was active with that, and I'm still active on some level with it, but not in the same way. And so I still see myself as, as an activist. I still, believe in third worldism. I still believe in self-determination. I still believe in no intervention, so all of those kind of principles of independence of nations and self-determination of peoples. And, even in the 69, we had in our coalition, the Bay Area Gay Liberation, which is bagel. And so they were in it too, so, it's really a lifelong kind of thing, wherever there's injustice, you fight for it.
I've been told we need to wrap up, so
Okay.
maybe you can be, very pithy.
I don't know. I don't think I ever think of activism as like a Jacob's coat of many colors. It's part of how you see things. And so whatever you're doing, if something needs to be supported or fixed, then that's what you do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. There were a few other questions here, but they were kind of related to the activism between then and now. I just want to read out one last comment because this is a nice appreciation. It's from Angie Faw. The example of iHotel and the 30-year hole in the ground prevented many other places from being bulldozed, including Nihon Machi, Little Friends, and Julia Borga building. So, thank you for that. And then, basically appreciations. So,
one of the things that what Estelle was talking about, and she was talking about the planning, to design the existing iHotel. Do you remember the photographs of the men looking out the windows? That was very important. That was their connection, because they could go out there and look at what's happening on the street. And you notice that when they designed the new hotel, every room you could look out the windows and see what's going on. To include that, to make sure after 30 years, when it was just a hole in the ground, shows you what activism means.
thank you. Please help me thank our speakers.